the podcast where we teach you how to get the most value out of being a parent. I am Kyle Steele, the head of school at VanDamme Academy, and I'm joined by the founder of VanDamme Academy, Lisa VanDamme, and mother of four. So our goal here today is we're going to, instead of having our normal format, we're going to be talking about a book that Lisa and I have both been reading called Hold On to Your Kids. You got it to show there? I can't remember the name of the authors, actually. What are the authors' names?
Gordon Neufeld and Gabor Mate.
All right. So Lisa and I have been reading this book for, I guess, about a month. We've been picking at it. And the more that we've read, the more we've just been saying, this explains so much. This is integrating and with so much of what we do and what we experience. It's challenging some ideas in the ways that we really like. It's that the metaphor I think of is in the movie Matrix, where all of a sudden you can see the Matrix. Like all of a sudden I see all these dynamics that are at play with children that I had let's say a subconscious understanding of. But now it's really sharp and really conscious. And so we're just hoping to explore those ideas a bit more and talk about what we like about them. Mm-hmm. So I think that the way I want to start this off, or at least this is the way that you wanted to organize this, is I'm going to just try to succinctly describe the central thesis of the book, and then we'll hop around to our different reactions to different ideas within it. So I have a fairly concise description of it. You tell me if this matches it for you, Lisa. Okay. So what I have here is that immature children need a relationship to someone that is orienting in a universal sense. It should be the parents or other adults. If they fail in that relationship, the peers will take the place, and a host of developmental problems follow as a result of that. Now, there's a lot of elaboration on this central idea, talking about how the orienting relationship works, and it's called attachment. That's the term that's used for that relationship. How it works out differently when a child is attached to their peers, and their peers are the North Star for them, or when it's their parents. And it talks about like the problems that come from a peer attached child and the different ways that you can protect and develop and rebuild a proper attachment with your children so that they are looking to you, an adult, as their North Star. So that's my summary of it. What do you think, Lisa? Am I leaving anything out, or do you have a different emphasis in your mind?
No, that is the emphasis. So the idea of this, children are inherently dependent. They have this inescapable need for a sense of mooring, for a fundamental feeling of attachment. And consequently, if that attachment is not to their parents, which it ideally should be for reasons they go into in this book, and certainly should be an attachment to adults, figures who will be stable and mature and can lead them in a good direction. If they don't have that attachment, then it will be to their peers instead. So because that need is fundamental and inescapable, it's either going to be that they attach to adult figures, ideally their parents, or it's going to be to their peers. And so just shaping the issue that way was really interesting and has kind of oriented my thinking as I'm walking through life, observing situations of parenting and schooling ever since I encountered it.
There's one condition I want to put on this, that this is true for immature children. That just to anticipate an objection I could imagine an objectivist having, is that as the child matures, they don't need forever this guiding, orienting figure, that eventually they become ready to be their own independent North Star, like a North Star to themselves. But it's inescapable that when they're young, they are, as I've said, ignorant and incompetent. With all respect to babies, they're ignorant and incompetent. And they cannot function in the world. And not just it's not just that they need orientation for discrete things like, how do I tie my shoes? Should I eat this berry? They need a figure in their cosmology, or that occupies a metaphysical role as the orienter, the person that they can turn to when they don't know what's happening or they don't know how to interpret something.
I like that clarification, because one of the phrases that I liked is that, I forget exactly how they put it, but basically that the adults in their lives are conduits of culture. And being conduits of culture means not just offering specific guidance and information and advice on discrete topics, but in a more holistic way, providing a basic orientation to the world that they're just immersed in and picking up on. We've talked a lot over the course of these parenting shows about the parenting that you do almost by default, that you do not consciously. You're parenting constantly and continuously by the sheer fact of your presence, your personality, your outlook on the world. Everything about your bearing is parenting. So wanting kids to be oriented toward picking up that culture from a mature and reliable source rather than immature, fluctuating peers.
One of the concessions of the book is it assumes that it's talking to a decent human being. That it's assuming that the parent is not a monster to begin with. Right. And I could imagine someone, there's a friend of mine that I'm picturing that, they had terrible parents, and if it wasn't for their friends, they might not have done so well in life. Sure. And so they might hear these ideas and say, what are you talking about? This would be monstrous. But that's kind of poisoning the well at the beginning to say, let's assume that the friends are good and the parents are bad. We're assuming that these are parents that are actually loving and have the best interests of their child at heart.
Yeah. Can I go back to one other thing you said, though? Because while I appreciate making the point that we're talking about immature children, I do find that in this rush to cultivate independence in children, people are treating them as if they are independent long before that's really possible to them. So I think of them as immature for a long time. We don't need to put a number on it. And obviously it is going to vary from child to child. But one of the things I liked best about this book was the notion that if you want to cultivate real independence in your children, you need to recognize their inescapable inherent dependence for a long time and provide them the guidance and the nurturing that they need in order to form a true sense of self, a true independent identity, and to be able to have that withstand the forces of peer culture.
Yeah, the book makes the argument that it's very against the model that children need to be pushed out of the nest, that if they don't get pushed out of the nest, they're never going to learn to fly. And this is almost always a wrong-headed notion that the way that children get to independence is not by being shoved into it, but that you create a space within which they can safely mature and the natural processes of development happen. And then they're going to leave on their own. And it's not going to be like a day where they just suddenly pack the bags, go out the door, but they're going to claim independence naturally if you are if you're providing that attachment and nurturing in your home. So I guess the thing that I want to know where you want to take the conversation, but for me, my experience reading this book was there's a lot of premises I had that it integrated very, very well with, but it kind of the sum became more than the total of the parts by reading this book.
Yeah.
I wrote down 4 things that were ideas I had consciously before, but this really drew them together. We talked about the idea that children are dependent when they're born, and that's a fundamental condition of the relationship you have as a parent. Another is that the parental relationship should be of value, that it should be enjoyed, that it should be a lot of love and affection. It's not task oriented. I'm going to make this child into something. I'm going to love this child and love spending time with them and make that a beautiful thing.
Well, can we maybe take these
sure.
slowly and develop them a little bit? So obviously this resonated with you and me on that first point, because throughout this series, we've been talking about focusing on a relationship rather than rules.
Right.
That good parenting is building a good relationship with your child. And then the way it's described in this book is that if you have successfully built that relationship, then you can parent instinctually. You don't really need rules. If you know how to live life yourself and you've cultivated a good relationship with your child, then they're going to be looking to you for that guidance, and it's going to be easy to give it to them. You don't have to have these kind of punishment and rewards systems and mechanisms and rules and things to
tricks and
techniques. Yeah, it's just about the relationship and about the fact that they're looking to you to figure out how they want to be. So it's just interesting that we've been stressing this issue of relationships, not rules, and that was really central to the thesis of this book.
Yeah, the metaphor that they had on this that I really, really liked was that if you have an attachment with the child, it's like having power steering in your car. And everything just works more easily.
Yeah.
But if you don't have an attachment or a relationship to a child, then it's like driving a car without power steering, where it's just everything's an enormous labor. And I noticed this most in the classroom as I was teaching, that if I could get away with, I didn't need a lot of bells and whistles in my lessons. I didn't need complicated pedagogical mechanisms to help my kids learn long division. If I have a good rapport with them, if I have a good relationship with them, it goes very smoothly, and that they don't need big tricks to motivate them. There's this guy at the front of the classroom that they like, and they're oriented towards him. He's a pretty reliable North Star for them, and they will follow along just for the satisfaction of spending some time together with someone who they think is a decent fellow. And so, yeah, it fits in very well with all the stuff we've been saying about focus on the relationship, not on techniques and tricks and rules.
And I feel like there's no way to say this without sounding boastful. So I'll just confess that from the start. Sure. But when I reflect on my own relationship, especially with my older daughters who are now adults, so, their maturation process is largely complete. Looking back on our relationship, I just remember, I think I may have told this story before, but there was one time that we were riding in the car together, and they had one of those cute little Q&A games, where like getting to know you games. And they had a friend in the car. And the question was, name a rule in your household that you object to, that you don't like. And Lana and Greta, my daughters, sat there for a minute and absolutely could not come up with a rule, not one that they didn't object to. They could not think of a rule that existed in their house. And then finally, Lana said, "Oh, I know, no denim with denim." That was the only rule she could come up with. So that was actually kind of startling even to me to realize, oh yeah, we don't have rules. That's not how we operate. And it relates to this principle at school where parents will ask us, how do you approach discipline? And the answer is always with conversation. So you don't need rules, you don't need formulas, you don't need principles. If you have a good, well-established relationship with the kids, they look up to you, they're oriented to you, they're interested in doing well for you, then you can depend on that and don't have to use the techniques and tricks instead.
Yeah. This is not related to the topic of parenting, but I'm now realizing that when I saw Lana square dancing, that was youthful rebellion because she had denim on denim.
Oh, that rule has totally changed now. It's fashionable.
Yeah. Now, this is one of the things that was challenging for me about this book, that it almost seems hostile to techniques and tricks. It seems like it's saying the more, especially like purveyors of techniques and tricks, like parenting gurus that are trying to sell products, like use these 3 sneaky tricks to get your child to brush their teeth. And I personally find that these, I've really benefited a lot from things like that over the years. And so I think that the truth might be somewhere in the middle, that they're right that having a good relationship makes it so that you don't need complicated a thesis in order to be a parent. But if you don't have a good relationship with the kids and you're not sure how to do it, there's a lot of techniques and tricks and guidelines and principles that you can try, and it will, it'll help you if you're starting from behind. Do you
Yeah,
agree with that,
I do.
or?
Well, here's my theory about it. I have to keep track of my thoughts because I have a few. My theory, without much evidence, is that the effort that this book is making is to calibrate. And in order to calibrate, you have to sometimes go way far, like make it an absolute and not even discuss the kind of exceptions that make the rule or whatever. Just don't even address those because you're identifying the fundamental. Now, maybe they could have acknowledged and addressed the places where it might make sense to have kind of incentives or natural consequences. They're very against even natural consequences, much less punishment and rewards. But I did appreciate kind of almost the zealotry of it to get me focused on this as the fundamental. And then I feel comfortable figuring out where the exceptions might exist. So there are certainly times, and I also do like the kind of absolutism of it in the effort, in the effect on me of challenging when I stray from this principle and really questioning, is this a legitimate place to stray from this principle or is it not? So I might use some incentives to get my kids to, finish their dinner, eat their healthy food, or get to bed on time or whatever. And I'm content that those can exist on the margins, but I do stop to think sometimes, is this furthering the basic relationship that I want with my children and what I think will be effective in the long run for shaping them in the right direction and for getting the kind of compliance that leads to genuine development of independence, because that's the real goal.
Yeah. I think that it's a matter of priority is what it comes down to, is that the relationship is the first thing that you do to try to work on and solve these problems.
Yes.
And then tips and tricks and techniques, they come later if you need them. Now,
can I add one other quick thing in there? So I had a parent at our school approach me and say, well, I've been listening to your discussion of this book, and I think you read some of it too. And he said, but at your school, there are times that the teachers will use some sort of incentive system to get compliance. So how is that consistent with what you've been saying? And part of my answer to him, it's funny because it came up again this morning, where he was talking about using incentives with the kids and kind of chuckling about it, being sort of sheepish about it. And I just said, on the margins, it's okay. On the margins. So that's the idea, is that there might be times that you have a situation where you use the phrase a Napoleon problem. I should probably explain what that means, but so I guess, do you want to explain a Napoleon
Sure,
problem?
yeah. So there's this story that's likely not true, but that Napoleon was at some sort of a dinner party, and a cadet that had too much to drink went up to him and said, if you're the greatest general in the world, what would you do in this situation? And he describes a situation where the army is outnumbered and supply lines are cut and the terrain is working against him. And he says, if you're the greatest general, how do you solve that problem? And Napoleon's response was, because I'm the greatest general, I would not find myself in that situation. Right. And so we have this phrase that we use called a Napoleon problem, where the only solution to that problem is to not get into it in the first place. And so I take it you're saying that if you find yourself in a Napoleon situation, then some of these rules are going to get bent to some extent, that you got to get back to equilibrium before you can start to go to
find yourself in a Napoleon situation where you don't have the level of attachment and the nature of relationship that would allow best for this sort of spontaneous parenting or spontaneous guidance, then you might have to resort a little bit to the tips and tricks on the margin. And I definitely find myself having to do that. But what I try to do now is keep in mind, well, what is my ultimate goal? And how can I minimize my use of that while enhancing the nature of the relationship that I'm seeking with them to move in general in the direction I want to go with them? And I'm very conscious of that. I'll just give one other example. One of the points I found the most interesting was a discussion of the use of power, parenting power, and that it's kind of a bad word because when you have power, you can have abuses of power. And obviously we want to be cautious about power abuses, but at the same time, inherently there's going to be a power balance and dynamic between a mature adult and, as you said, an ignorant, incompetent being. You have to have more, you have to be in the driver's seat to a large extent, guiding them through their development. They're in the book, they're very against using power to get compliance, and instead, depending on the relationship that's been built to get compliance. One of my parenting faults, I will confess, is that I raise my voice too often. And this book has helped me be conscious of the kind of discomfort of gaining compliance by raising my voice, because raising my voice, I may be thinking of it as trying to get their attention, but it can be just kind of forcing my will upon them. So I'm trying to stop myself from doing that and just make a greater effort to get their attention, not raising my voice, not making myself large and intimidating in their eyes, but just building that connection instead.
Yeah. And they go to quite a great length in their chapter on discipline, which I thought was great. And it just seemed to resonate with so much of my own experience that when you're using power in that way, essentially what you're doing is you're withholding attachment from the child. You're saying, I know that you are going to be scared and in pain unless you're close to me. I'm going to keep you away until you do what I want. And what ends up, first of all, it's painful and cruel to do that. And second, it makes it really easy for the child to eventually say, well, I can't count on this shrew to to give me the attachment that I need. Maybe my friends at school, maybe they're a better place for me to go. And we actually haven't talked too much about what really is we love this book because of the positive model of parenting that's presented here, but the bulk of it is actually talking about the negative consequences of when things go wrong. So I don't have a very concise summary of that. How would you put the problem of peer orientation if you're trying to do it on one foot?
Well, so it's premised on this idea that kids are inherently dependent and inherently have this drive for attachment. So the question is, where are they going to find? They need that. They will find it somewhere. If they don't find it with you, then they will find it somewhere else. And the natural place, especially given current cultural forces, for them to find it is with their friends. They're with their friends all day at school. They're largely unsupervised in school environments. They have this constant access because of technology. So there are a number of reasons why the way our culture is shaped, they're going to turn to their peers instead. And the essential problem that they describe is that peers are not unconditionally loving. That you can't, if you're anchoring yourself to something that's in flux, you can't count on your peers to be there. They're notoriously unreliable. They're also notorious, just not because kids are bad, but because kids are kids. So and you don't have that. It doesn't make sense that you would have that relationship of unconditional love with in this casual setting where you're loosely connected to people. So the unconditional love was part of it. The simple immaturity. Kids don't, we talked about, ideally the parents are conduits of culture. Kids are uncultured. They're not civilized. They haven't developed the means of interacting with each other in a respectful manner. They haven't developed, principles of loyalty and all the things that we would associate with being a cultured person. Your peers aren't going to have that. So kids are anchoring themselves to forces. They're anchoring themselves to people equally ignorant and what was your other adjective?
Incompetent.
Incompetent, uncivilized, ignorant, incompetent, uncivilized.
We
They're
love
anchoring
kids here,
themselves
folks.
to that.
Go on.
Oh, absolutely. So
Oh, I'm
yeah,
sorry, it's frozen on my end.
oh no. Can you hear me?
I am, speaking of attachment, I don't have attachment right now.
Oh, no.
Okay, I think I'm back now. Sorry about that.
Okay. That's all right. So I think let's see, there was one other category of what, so turning to children for your instruction, your comfort, your guidance, your security. It's funny because you and I'm going to repeat a conversation that you were there present for because the people listening weren't. But we ran into a parent at school and we're describing the thesis of this book and said to her that it's about what happens when kids lose their attachment to their parents and instead turn for this instruction and comfort and guidance and security to their peers. And she went, "Ooh, that's dicey." That's it. That's exactly it. If you turn to your peers for these fundamental needs, this comfort, this, situation that allows for maturation, if you're turning to your peers, that's dicey. You can't rely on them.
Yeah.
And that's going to be, the book talks a lot about the effects on a child's soul of turning to peers, not getting those values, and therefore basically putting up a wall against attachment altogether, against vulnerability altogether.
Yeah. And so this attachment we've described in principle how it is not stable and not good. And the sort of downstream effects are a lot of conformity, because in order to get those attachment jolts from your peers, you've got to be in conformity with what they want, what they expect. It leads to anxiety disorders because you don't know when they're going to withdraw the attachment and withdraw the affection. It can lead to promiscuity and drug use because these are ways that you can create a feeling of attachment kind of artificially. And so a lot of the traditional problems of youth can really be traced back to being peer oriented, that they're pursuing that comfort of attachment from the wrong place, and that just kind of spirals into more and more problems as they go along.
Now we have a question here from Landon Walsh, and we have only 2 minutes left.
Sure.
So I would like to quickly answer this question, invite Landon to come on to Clubhouse if you want to discuss it further. And then I do think we should have a second conversation about this book because there's a lot that we haven't been able to get into. So I'd be, okay. So the question is, our daughter regularly makes outlandish assertions like the moon is made of cheese and gets mad when we challenge her on this. Well, interestingly, I think this is very closely related. The book, which I recommend, hold on to your kids, has a fascinating section on what they call counter will. And they discuss the difference between counter will and actual assertions of independence. So if I remember it correctly, Kyle, you can correct me if I haven't gotten this right. Counter will is kind of, it's sort of a natural impulse of children, kind of a flexing of their independence muscles to go against something their parents say. So kids do this a lot in a lot of different scenarios, a lot of different contexts. So, but what they make a point of doing is, well, differentiating those assertions from actual independence, which would mean it comes from kind of a conscious, secure, settled sense of identity, not from this impulse, this instinct to defy, so the instinct to defy is normal, but it needs to be differentiated from independence, and also to differentiate it from when it becomes a systemic problem that is a consequence of their not being attached to you. So if that counter will becomes sort of entrenched, because they talk about this bipolar nature of attachment. If they're not attached to you, they may become more attached to peers. When they become attached to peers, they reject you as a source of attachment. And so culturally, this is what we're seeing often. So it's normal to a certain degree, but if it becomes a consequence of their really seeking their attachment orientation somewhere else, then it's going to become a more persistent, more serious, more fundamental problem that really plagues them. Does
Yeah.
that fit with your understanding?
Yeah, I'll just confess that that part of the book I'm not remembering super duper
Okay.
clearly, but everything
Sure.
that you say sounds perfectly fine to me.
So
And
I think
so
my basic answer to Landon would be, without questioning further, I can't be sure, but that sounds pretty normal to me.
mhm,
And
yeah,
if it starts to feel like it's systemic and that it relates to distancing herself from you as a guide and authority, then I would look at what you can do to create conditions to reestablish that connection in that relationship. And the book, thankfully, gives a lot of very simple,
mhm.
very pleasant suggestions for how to reestablish that connection.
Yeah, the advice that it gives in the latter part of the book is it describes a household that just sounds wonderful to live in. And so
Yeah.
it sounds really nice to pursue. One thing that I wanted to say to that question, this is just kind of a hunch, we'd want to ask more questions if we could, but I think that it might be that the meaning of that statement to the child is not what you think it is.
Mhm.
And that the defiance might be stemming from that. Maybe they're trying to share something. I don't know, they heard it in the song or at daycare or something like that. And that there's something that's trying to be shared, and it might feel like it's being rejected by being correct.
Mm.
And I don't think that there's a need to correct it. I don't think that there's danger that they're going to do poorly on a future astronomy exam if the
Mhm.
composition of the moon is not corrected or anything like
But
that.
it's now that you say that, it's funny because I hadn't made this connection, but I have a daughter who's 7, and she's
Mhm.
taken recently to saying, no, it's not, about something that is absolutely true, but she'll just say it flatly as if there's no argument. And she'll do this in a variety of different situations about a variety of different topics. And I just sort of giggle and say, you're just asserting that in that strong, powerful way doesn't actually make it fact. But
Mhm.
I think I sort of laugh it off because at least in the context of my relationship with her, it does feel like that counter will, like a little bit of assertion of independent, practiced, famed independence and defiance. And that's cute within
Yeah.
within a realm. It's just not actual independence.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're past our time. I think we should hop over to Clubhouse. If you want to talk to us directly, we'd love to hear from you over there. Oh, and sorry to
Oh, yeah.
our great our swaths of British fans, but we have a holiday next week that you poor sad people don't called Thanksgiving. And so Lisa and I are both going to be celebrating Thanksgiving. There will be no episode next week, but we'll see everyone in 2 weeks. All right.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.